Oh, hi, Vaughn.
Hello, Harold.
Well, when we spoke at this time last week, the province was still dealing with the fallout over Charlie Pollock and the rare disease drug. That got resolved.
Yeah, it's still going on, really. So last Thursday night, the government announced it was reversing its decision and continuing funding for the one drug that offers relief to this little 10-year-old girl from Langford, suburb of the capital. The government is going to continue to pay for this very expensive drug that alleviates the symptoms of what is a fatal illness, Batten disease. So government announced they were going to do that. They said it was because of a dispute among experts. They decided that the experts disagreed about the efficacy of the drug, and the government didn't want the little girl and her family caught in the middle. So while they were reviewing all the evidence and looking at how the whole system works, they were going to restore funding indefinitely. So that was the decision. Later on Friday, after we spoke, we started to hear that members of the provincial committee, the provincial experts who'd said, we don't think you should continue the funding because we don't think this drug is effective, started to resign in protest. The government, to its credit, didn't name them, didn't shame them or put them out in the public. And we had trouble reaching them, but there's a piece in the Sun today by Alec Lazenby. Alec has talked to the chair of the subcommittee who resigned, and I guess you'd say she's speaking for the other four members of that subcommittee that have resigned in protest. And it's a pretty withering denunciation of the New Democrats for the decision they made here. So she's a medical doctor. She says she stands by the decision. She says this is the first time the government has ever overruled the advice that it gets on this issue for whether or not to pay for expensive drugs for rare conditions. She says the New Democrats were just playing politics. I guess it might surprise readers that politicians would play politics with an issue. Politics was certainly part of this, but I think the doctor is downplaying the significance of what changed the government's opinion here, which was a letter. Health minister said the letter was the tipping point. This is a letter signed by 13 experts in Batten disease who said the drug is effective at treating the symptoms. So, when you look at what this doctor's saying, they're saying, well, it's not effective in the long term. Harold, nobody thinks it's effective in the long term. All it does is alleviate the ferocious seizures that come with the drug. And the little girl's mother says it did do that. And the father of a little boy in Alberta, where they're paying for the drug as well, says the same thing. The little boy, they're able to enjoy what time he has left. I mean, if people can go to the Facebook page of Jory Fales, the mother of Charlie Pollock, and just read what she posted on the weekend, it's really moving. They're relieved that the drug funding will continue. They're relieved that it relieves her symptoms. But she says, we know she's going to go. We know that she's not going to be with us for a lot longer. The disease is fatal. So long-term effective is meaningless in this case. I mean, I was surprised at some of the things that the doctor said. I appreciate her explaining how the system works. I appreciate her telling her side of the story. But seriously, to say it's just politics or it's just other medical experts who are enthralled with the drug companies, she said, she attacked the media coverage on this too. She said, what about other cases where, the patients aren't as photogenic? For God's sake, this is a 10-year-old girl. This is a tragic story. And if the doctor and her colleagues don't get it, You know, she's saying that this undermines the whole system. I don't think it does. We have a good system here in BC for deciding whether or not we pay for these drugs. And it's good that we consult experts. This is the one case where the experts were overruled. It's the only person in Canada who's been cut off coverage for this drug. It's the only patient in BC. She's a 10-year-old girl, and her family is fighting to enjoy what time is left with her. Like, if you don't see that as unique circumstances that warrant this decision, don't constitute a precedent for all the other cases. I mean, I think you just need to get over yourself. And the doctor and her colleagues should do that.
All right, Vaughn. Our Premier, David Eby, was meeting with his fellow premiers and Prime Minister Carney this week. What was on the agenda? We can guess that obviously trade and tariffs.
Well, you know, I think the first thing we should say is that the previous prime minister didn't see much point in meeting with the premiers in a group, because I think he just thought they always had their hand out. I'll give Mark Carney credit for recognizing that the way our federation works, the division of powers between provinces and the federal government, where we've got an economic and a tariff crisis, it's a good thing to meet with the premiers and hear what they have to say and try to work with them. So that's the most important thing I would say happened. The premier, David Eby, did come out and caution us that we should not expect necessarily a comprehensive agreement with the Americans by the August the 1st deadline. He says much more likely we will have some tariffs and some sectoral agreements. And he said he hopes that for British Columbia, there will be a settlement of the softwood lumber dispute. So that actually predates Donald Trump, and it predates Mark Carney. And Eby said he thinks the best solution is probably that Canada would agree to put a quota, a cap on how much lumber it ships to the United States, and that would take the pressure off us. It would mean probably, well, we'll be selling less lumber to the United States. So it's not a consequence, something that won't have consequences here. But Eby said he thinks that's the most likely place to go with this. And we're looking at huge tariffs. So if we can get if a quota deal will get us off the hook on tariffs that I think 35% or something like that by the fall, the premier is probably right to hope that's the way. And I think it'd probably be a good thing if he's right. He also talked to the prime minister about bail reform. This is important because, I mean, the premier's been calling for bail reform for some time, but he gave the prime minister a letter from the family of Bailey McCourt, so pleading for bail reform. So Bailey McCourt is the 32-year-old mother of two who was beaten to death in Kelowna, broad daylight, almost exactly 3 weeks ago today. The accused in the case is her estranged husband. He's charged with second-degree murder. He was in court earlier that day of the attack. He was convicted of 3 counts of uttering threats and 1 count of assault by strangulation or choking. He was nevertheless released on bail that day, pending a psychiatric assessment and a sentencing hearing in September. It isn't surprising to me that people want to look at that bail decision and change the system around it. Part of the change would have to come from Ottawa, change of the criminal code for how courts deal with such issues at sentencing time. There's also a review underway by the prosecution service of how the prosecution service assesses the risk of releasing convicted persons pending sentencing, assessing that risk. So I think the premier says that the prime minister is an advocate of bail reform. He believes he'll take action on it this fall. The Attorney General of BC, Nikki Sharma, said this week that the prosecution service is reviewing its procedures. It's sad that it takes a tragedy like this, an avoidable tragedy like this, to prompt action. But whatever it does, It's a good thing, and I think that's where we're headed provincially and federally.
Well, as you noted last week, though, Vaughn, bail reform was not necessarily at the root of this. CP, Canadian Press, got the recording of what happened there. There wasn't even an application
No, that's true.
by the prosecutor in this case for to have him held.
That's true, and the Premier offered an explanation for that, and the Attorney General offered the same explanation. They say that the Criminal Code provisions on withholding bail, it's called reverse onus,
right,
don't allow for a bail decision to be revisited at the sentencing stage of a case. So the accused in this case was granted bail over a year ago in June of 2024, and as far as the system is concerned, that bail carried over even after the conviction. There was not grounds under the criminal code. This is what we're told, right? I'm not a lawyer.
Right.
And some days I'm grateful for that. There were no grounds for the prosecutor to go in and say, Your Honor, in light of these convictions, in light of the evidence presented in court, 3 counts of uttering threats, 1 of assault by choking, Your Honor, we think you should revoke bail. They say under the criminal code there's no grounds for that. Well, that's what they want to reform. They want the criminal code changed that would allow, in cases involving domestic violence, in cases involving violent repeat offenders, that at the sentencing phase, you could seek to overturn the granting of bail. But you're right. It didn't happen here. They say it didn't happen here because there was no way to do it. Well, I guess that's for a postmortem too. And you know, the other thing is this whole thing is now covered by bans on publication. You know, so I mean, I sometimes wonder about bans on publication, if they're really there to protect anybody other than the prosecution service and the court from scrutiny. But in this case, you're right. The Canadian Press got the recording of the bail hearing. And when you see what was said in court, your reaction is, didn't anybody at least think to warn the complainant, in this case, that this guy was being released, and maybe take some protective measures? Because that court proceeding ended at 10 in the morning on Friday 3 weeks ago, and at 1 in the afternoon, 3 hours later, the police responded to the vicious attack with a hammer on Bailey McCourt, and she died in hospital later that day.
Yes. Oh, tragic story. Well, it's not going to surprise anyone to know that, you know, to learn that our emergency rooms are overcrowded. We've been reporting that for a long time now, but this was a new thing that I'd not seen documented before, that I can recall seeing at least, and that's the people who go to emergency departments and then walk away before they've been seen by a doctor. What's that about?
Well, first of all, credit to the official opposition, the BC Conservatives, for asking for the data on this. It turns out the government keeps data on walkaways. So they keep track of how many people check in at the ER seeking treatment and how many leave before they get treatment. And it's a large number of people. Tens of thousands of people do this, and the list is growing. The statistics province-wide are an almost 100% increase in walkaways from the ER over the last 7 years. And that's an average over 7 years. Here in Victoria, on Vancouver Island, Island Health reporting 160% increase over the last few years. So a lot of people are showing up at the ER, taking a look at how long they're having to wait, and walking away. The health ministry does not dispute the numbers, which they can't really do since the numbers came from the health ministry under an access to information request. The health ministry says, well, you have to realize that the kind of people that are doing this, you know, these are not acute cases. Okay, so they're not bleeding, was the way I'd take it. And maybe there's some people that, you know, don't need to go there. They've got a sunburn or something. But look at how our system works. We tell people, go to the doctor, go to the doctor. Well, if you don't have a family doctor, the only place you can go is the ER. You know, the thing that jumps out to me is when we talk about having user fees for emergency or user fees to go to the doctor, the first argument you get is you don't want to make people choose between paying the user fee and paying the grocery bill. People can't afford it, right? So you don't want fees, which are like hidden taxes on use of the healthcare system. Well, time is money too for busy people. You know, you think of two parents working and which one of you takes the child in and waits, or who's working first thing the next morning, or what are your childcare arrangements. Time is a hidden tax on youth of the healthcare system too, when you look at the kind of wait times we're seeing now. I've seen 12 hours in Surrey, 14 in Langley. Somebody came in and told me 16 hours in Maple Ridge. That's a barrier to use of the healthcare system too. And I wouldn't be so smug as to assume that everybody who goes, I've had enough and leaves, maybe they should have seen a doctor. Maybe they should have waited. And maybe, you know, there is a medical problem that was not treated because of it.
Well, it'd be interesting to know if I don't know if they would keep this data, but how many of these people checked in, as you say, walked away, and then were still sick and came back the next day or the day after that, or wound up, you know, in some other hospital. Like when I did the math on this number, Vaughn, it averaged 389 people a day.
Yes.
Over the course of a year. That's a shocking number. And as we know, you know, with the way the emergency departments are set up now, at least the large ones, after you check in, or even before you get checked in many cases, there are nurses there who take your blood pressure, monitor your vitals to make sure you don't need immediate urgent care. So there's a amount of staff time that gets wasted checking people in who then subsequently walk away.
Yes, and we've had the stats that there's been more than 200 ER closures around the province. So those are places where you're sent to the next towns. You're not just waiting, but you're sent to the next town. I got a note. Some people have darkly humorous approaches to this. Somebody sent me a note for the wait time at Surrey Memorial, and they'd calculated that they could have driven to Vancouver International Airport, flown to Toronto, been treated and gotten back before they would have gotten in at Surrey Memorial. I do bless British Columbians that they're able to bring a sense of humor to this, but I would suggest that this statistic tells us there's something there in the system we really should be worried about. And just going, well, you know, there's triage. Yes, of course, some people go in first and they sort it out. But still, if people are walking away from the health care that they may well need without seeing a doctor, and they don't have a family doctor, they got no other place to go, that's a tax and a burden on the system too, because for many people of modest means, seniors, people on budgets, time is money as well as money is money.
Sure, that's right. And if they're off work for a week because they can't get treatment, then that costs the economy as well. So yeah, lots of ramifications with this. So we'll stay on top of that. Now, tell us about the BCGEU. You've been following this closely. They're taking a strike vote, or they've already taken it. Where are they at?
So the main union representing government employees, the BCGEU, is taking an online strike vote next month. So August the 11th to the 29th, I think. So they've set aside a chunk of time to be able to vote online. They say, of course, that just because you're taking a strike vote doesn't mean you're going to be on strike, but it's their attempt to put pressure on the government. And this union is farther along than all the other unions that are negotiating with the government this year, because the entire public sector is without a contract now. So there's almost 200 contracts. There's 450,000 people that are unionized and covered. And the other unions are looking to see what happens here. But the BCGEU is clearly very far apart from the government on bargaining positions. It's mostly wages and benefits. That's the big issue. The government tried to send the message to the unions that there is no money So they called this the balanced budget bargaining mandate. The budget is $11 billion in deficit at least. So it does reflect the situation. They offered them 3.5% in 2 installments over 2 years. The unions, the BCGEU has come back and asked for 8.25% over 2 years plus cost of living adjustment. So the BCGEU position is double the government's position, roughly. I mean, it depends. There's nuances and details, as there always is. I don't see the government moving that far. The union says the government isn't even keeping up with inflation, that many of its members are struggling. The union has one couple of good points, I think. The New Democrats have only discovered the virtues of balancing the budget in the last little while. They didn't seem, David Eby never seemed to be bothered about that, having to do that before. He's run big deficits. He inherited a surplus from John Horgan. He spent it and more. And the second thing is they say, the government has built up its managerial ranks and its political appointees much faster and bigger and with bigger raises than the unionized workers in the front lines. So they're saying, if the New Democrats had paid a little more attention to those things, or were to cap those things, they might have some money to actually pay wages to the frontline workers. I think there's some grounds, there's some merit in those statements. But having said that, I think the government has come around to realizing that, we've reported using the budget that the deficit will be 11 billion this year. We're now seeing independent analysis that says it'll be bigger than that because they haven't incorporated the $2 billion hit they'll take for getting rid of the carbon tax. The economy is slowing. Housing starts are slowing. There's the impact of the tariffs. So, the government really can't even afford what it's offering, never mind what the union's asking for.
Okay. And how important is whatever BCGEU settles for to the other? Will it be the template for the other unions or?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yes, that's usually it. The government tries to give everybody roughly the same because they don't want to be whipsawed back and forth.
Right.
Now, some unions have a better time, a greater opportunity to put pressure on the government. I mean, nurses, for example. The disruption from nurses or hospital employees having a labor dispute, teachers, janitorial and clerical workers in the schools, so those do. The BCGEU does have areas it can put pressure on, and government liquor stores is one of them, but they don't have as much grounds for putting pressure on the government as some of the other unions. So, but they're going first. And, the New Democrats hired George Heyman to try to help with these talks. So Heyman was the environment minister in the last NDP government. He didn't run again. But more importantly, from the government's point of view, he's a former head of the BCGEU. He was president of a union. I think they're kind of hoping that he can maybe talk some sense into his old friends at the BCGEU. And, anything that works, I guess they'll be grateful for. The government feels like they feel a little mystified by what's happened here, Harold. The BCGEU was always in the past one of the more conciliatory unions with NDP governments. And New Democrats are now kind of saying darkly behind the scenes, my God, they're acting like the BCTF, the Teachers Federation, with their demands and expectations. So I don't know. It's an interesting one, but yeah, the strike vote will know what it is by the end of August. I think workers generally give their union a good strike vote. A union can be really embarrassed if they don't get a good margin in a strike vote. So I think there's going to be a lobby within the union. Well, let's give our negotiating team a good mandate to go back to the table and say we're going to need more to settle this thing.
So ironically, around Labor Day will be quite. It'll all become clear.
We'll know the numbers around Labor Day. Yeah, good point.
All right. Okay. All right. Thanks, Vaughn.
Thanks, Harold. We'll talk again next week.